Welcome to our last class of Mysteries of the Mind. Let me remind you that today is anniversary of the earthquake 50 years ago. How many of you were here in Alaska? Oh, quite a few. So we won't forget it. Huh? As a matter of fact, I was in Europe. I heard about it when I was at Innsbruck Winter Olympics and attending a seminar with Professor Heisenberg, and I heard about it today, 50 years ago. And nobody knew what really happened, you know. It took about a week until we were told. Yeah. So 50 years ago. Yeah. So today is our last class of Mysteries of the Mind. What I have tried to do to give you a survey of our investigation into the mysterious myself mind. This adventure started many thousand years ago. And it was very difficult, and it is still. We have not made great progress in our penetration into the structure of what is the mind. We had many sidelines our mind produced to confuse the issue, so that we don't investigate the mind, we investigate everything else but the mind. So in the process, it became evident that there are certain approach of the mind, and it is its awareness that the mind has something very important. Question and answer. Where it comes from, we don't know. But awareness of having question to which we try to make an answer is the central discovery of the mind. Of course, there were many questions, but to concentrate on problem of the question as such is an achievement of an abstraction. When the mind is able to climb up and look upon itself. Something similar happened when Greeks invented geometry, mathematics. When Pythagoras traveled in Egypt, and when he saw geometry. When he made designs of a triangle, rectangular, and had it on papyrus, returned back to Greece. And he did not have the fields, flooded fields Egyptians had. He had designs on piece of paper. And he created a world for the mind which will consider this triangle. There is a triangle. Where? Of course it was in his mind, and he asked abstract questions. His observation was self-evident. A triangle has 3 sides. Hooray, 3 sides. 3 angles. There is a relationship of angles and the sides. This was the problem of the mind. Egyptians never asked these questions. They had their own problems with flooded fields. You see this jump into abstraction. Pythagoras created a world of numbers. And in his mind, he believed that this is the real world. The world of numbers. So if we can manage this world, this is the only world really to consider. Everything else is secondary. So here is an example how Greek mind in Pythagoras produced the first great abstraction out of which came the world of mathematics, of numbers, of objects of the mind. Where are these objects? Later, there were others who learned this lesson. And I have to tell you, it was very difficult for Greeks themselves to understand this jump. They were realists. Realists believe in things in front of you. So Pythagoras was regarded as a kind of crazy. He lived on island Samos. And this little island was governed by a tyrant. Of course, the tyrants usually don't know very much. And Pythagoras was suspect. People around him were coming and talking about something the poor tyrant did not understand. So what to do? Of course, but Pythagoras was afraid. He tried to save his life. It must have been a great discovery of his mind that he is unsafe. He left with his pupils for southern Italy. In southern Italy, he organized a small group of Pythagoreans, kind of a semi-religious group. He introduced laws, for instance. His adherents were not supposed to eat beans. Yeah, I know. I was forbidden too, for the same reason. So they were forbidden to eat beans, among other things. The people around Pythagoreans in southern Italy were also Italians and non-Pythagoreans, regarded Pythagoreans as kind of suspect of doing strange things, talking about something nobody understood they were talking about. So the Brotherhood had a tough time in southern Italy as well. Until one day, the environment of the vigilants attacked Pythagoreans and killed most of them. Only few of them escaped to Syracuse, thus preserving the tradition of mathematics. Those who killed them were convinced that this was the right thing to do. 50 years ago, when I was talking about it, there was one student in the class who said, "Why didn't they kill everybody?" You really, the world would have been better off had they killed all of them? Yes, I hate mathematics. So 3,000 years later, you have an echo, of these vigilantes who were running, the world has not changed very much.
No, we still have it.
Yeah.
I think some of them are still trying to kill us all.
So there were few of them who escaped to Syracuse and continued the tradition which came up to us. So it is not only mathematics. It is a way of thinking which goes into mathematics. This is what Pythagoreans preserved. It went to other generations. And the best Greek minds were mathematically minded. One of the greatest one is Plato, who took over the theory, produced his whole philosophy. I talked about it. He is the first one who laid down the foundation for study of the mind, of the soul. And the soul was the primary. He was an idealist, and soul must have resided somewhere, not in this imperfect world, but somewhere in this nebulous, perfect heaven. From that, soul came embedded into the body and shared this life with imperfect body, pulling the body up and the body dragging the soul down. You heard this story. Out of this duality came later whole history of the West. There were very few people who added to this story. The mind, soul, was divided into three parts. Reason, also physiology, reason, brain. Emotion, heart. And the will to survive, stomach. There are three parts within the soul. Plato created a sociology out of these three parts. Those who have the upper are rulers. Those who have a big heart are protectors of republic. And those who have big stomachs are those who work and they don't know anything else. For that, they can have wives and children, according to Plato. Those who know, rulers and soldiers, they know what is the highest value. They don't care for children or for wives. They have all wives in common. And children too. The children call everybody uncle. And only proletarians, later proletarians, those with big stomachs, are those who deserve private property. So, private property is for those who don't know. As you have noticed in our recent history, we have reversed Plato. And everything is private property. Without private property, we wouldn't have anything. So you see how little was done here. So Plato gave us concept of soul, mind, three parts of it. These three parts go all through the history from 5th century BC up to 19th century. It affects everything. Those who have big heart in 19th century, they have feeling. Romanticists, you remember how they were painting, playing music, romantic music. Before they were rationalists in 18th century, encyclopedists. Then conflict of reason and heart in art, in philosophy, in everything, as well as in science. So the blueprint of Plato survived practically up to our days. We still are trying to penetrate this mind. Yesterday, I read a very interesting article. MIT is making experiments with what happens in human brain when human brain considers ethical questions. When the ethical question is in favor of ethical value, what happens in the brain? When a CEO does things which are against, what happens in the brain? So it is neurophysiology of the brain which will study ethical questions. They are maybe mistaken, but this is the latest approach. And it is like if I am brought to MRI and I am lying down in the machine and the radiologist says, Rudy, say something wise. and the machine is walking, trying to detect, what will happen when I say something wise. And I say, it is not easy. No, try. Okay, those who know don't talk. Those who talk don't know. Now there are 4 radiologists, who see the pictures of my brain. They start arguing. These 4 radiologists have 12 views. They are going to take a break and continue in their discussion of the break. What happened in my mind when I said something wise? And the discussion continues among them. So this is the old-fashioned approach, which we have believed in, that we can capture physiology of the mind, and it will tell us what they are. It is always we who tell the picture what it is. It is very difficult to escape, this necessity that there is a commentator, and comments are coming from the mind. We cannot help it. We have still the problem as we had before. In this 3,000 years old tradition, there was one amazing man who appeared in 5th century AD. It was Saint Augustine. Saint Augustine was a Platonist. He is the philosopher who lived very interesting life, If you know a little about him, he was not saint when he was young, and he became saint after he experienced life. He was burning the candle on both ends when he was young, but after he had lived it up, and turned Christian and studied theology under leading theologians, he became a great man of the church who brought Plato's teaching into the foundation of the church and with few minor changes erected Christianity on basis of Plato's teaching. He was a very astute thinker who knew the whole tradition, and he dared to add something very important. When he studied Plato and his three parts of the soul, he felt that there is something wrong in his assessment of the mind. His suggestion was that within the mind there must be some intention which focuses on something the mind follows. And when the mind follows intentionally an object A, it excludes everything else but A. And then it jumps to B, excludes everything else. So intentionality must be the central core of our mind. This was an idea which was too early to be swallowed, because those who studied Plato studied him and repeated him, and they didn't know, since Plato did not talk about intentionality. You know, maybe it was one of those mistakes of St. Augustine. It will wait until almost the end of 19th century when Professor Brentano at the University of Vienna introduced St. Augustine's intentionality into the foundation of psychology. One of his students was my Moravian compatriot, later German philosopher Husserl, Husserl, Edmund Husserl, who took the central core of intentionality of the mind and produced a new philosophy called phenomenology. Phenomenology, based on intentionality. His great task was to explain how the mind, intentional mind, works. And he selected a topic of inventing something. What happens in the mind of the inventor? How does invention happen? Out of nothing? What happens in the mind when something new happens in the mind? He could have studied Einstein, but he was before Einstein. But you understand that when something new happens, we call the man, he's a genius. What goes into the mind? Intentional mind of a genius. Maybe Freud, maybe Plato himself. What happens when this mind produces something original? And he gave us a method This method is method of bracketing. Before you have a problem, you have to have a problem. If you don't have a problem, nothing happens. So the first is you have a problem in science, in life, in personal life. You have a problem. You try to understand the problem and you define what the problem is. After you have defined it and embraced the problem, you cannot escape it. It is your baby. You go to sleep with it. And your mind works unconsciously. Consciously, Husserl says, you have to eliminate from your mind everything what anybody else said about the problem. You have to eliminate anything you have learned about the problem. That's very difficult. You have to clean your mind and wait. Something can happen. When I taught it 20, 30 years ago, students loved it, this phenomenology. At the end of the class, of the exam, when they were expecting that something happened, they came to me. They said, nothing happened. Nothing happened. Thank you. Thank you. I cannot force anybody that something has to happen. So they left, this was the final exam. Nothing happened. And you cannot force the mind to happen something. Later they called me, it did happen. Can you correct the grade? Well, I gave you an A anyway. So, this phenomenological bracketing produces in our mind something what is difficult to describe. You know what you are not supposed to do? To use, let's say, Aristotle, what he said, or Einstein, what he said about it, and then skate on it, what they said. You have to eliminate everything what you have learned in your life. Ideally, you are expected to have an empty mind which is ready to jump. So theoretically, you are ready to jump. And then nothing happens. When Einstein heard about it, he could not pronounce the long word, phenomenology. He said, is it right? Phenomenology. And after he read it again, he says, I am a phenomenologist. This is exactly how I work. This is how I work. I recognize when something happens. But most of the time, nothing happens. I have spent sleepless nights when nothing happened. So Husserl came as close as possible, to the mystery of the mind, creating something new. And so this is another method which came out of St. Augustine, intentionality. Intentional mind selects a topic. It cannot consider 10 topics at the same time. Selects a topic, focuses on the topic, eliminates everything around, brackets the mind, ready to jump. It is so easy to say. My students loved it, as I said, especially when they were leaving with blank page of paper. Only students can really comprehend, a problem like this. And they did, 25 years later, I meet them at Sam or Fred Meyer's, and they tell me, it happened a few times later. I cannot forget it, but it was so funny. It was one of the funniest jokes you have ever introduced in the class. Have you made it up? No, it was St. Augustine. So this is the study of the mind and how far we have advanced, During the last 30 years, there were many attempts of people who try to penetrate this dark area. There was a movement of synchronicity 30 years ago. The principle was separation of mind and body has to stop. We have to consider it as a happy marriage, both of them. By deciding this, you are leaving the paradigm of our Western culture. Either or. Primary, secondary qualities. Objective, subjective. So the movement of synchronicity introduced the first close connection between these two, mind and body. It happened before in quantum mechanics. As I mentioned, Niels Bohr, who in his investigation of atomic structure worked with something he did not sense, did not see, but he was talking about it. And he had to make decisions. And his decisions were personal decisions which affected the result of his study. Subjectivity fused with the matter of study produced a fusion which is neither subjective nor objective, but something together. The man who came from this group, from Copenhagen, whom I knew very well, and had a seminar with him, Eugene Wigner, Hungarian physicist, emphasized it as consciousness determining what consciousness studies, and the result of consciousness is determining our knowledge. This was Wigner. It was not popular among physicists. Why? He abandoned the paradigm, 3,000 years old paradigm, separating mind and body. And there were many others who followed Wigner. When Eugene Wigner was here, there was almost no great interest, in him. So he was happy to find a philosopher, and we became good friends. Later we met in Vienna, and practically until he died, we were in contact. And We complained about it and tried to explain how difficult it is to break the old paradigm. The whole generation, many generations were brought up in this paradigm. Thinking hurts. To overthrow a paradigm, you need not only good thinking, but a lot of guts. And so this very movement continues, and the leaders of the movement continue. Today they are old folks, but it is still alive, and even there is no progress, and it is so difficult to have progress. You know, Husserl's description is still with us. We know the conditions we can prepare in our mind, but we cannot create. We cannot force ourselves to create. It says something about our education. What do we do when we educate our children? Do we educate them? When you look at the statistics of our education in the world, you know, we don't do a very good job. 26 in mathematics, 21 in science, in general education 23. Evidently we missed the boat. But what are these objective assessments? We know that little Finland is #1, little South Korea #2. We don't know exactly what they do better. We don't pay attention to it, you know. But on these so-called objective tests, they produce much better. Matter of intelligence. Again, number. Intelligence has nothing to do with number. In Finland, they don't educate people according to number. They don't test them. There are no objective examinations. So it will take probably a long time before we start looking seriously at this problem. What does it mean to educate our generation? How did we succeed when 44% of our people believe that the world was created 4,000 years ago? Our great physicist, Tyson, offered a new course, Cosmos, 20 years after Sagan introduced it. He is being attacked in Kansas and in many other states that he did not give the same chance to religious groups to talk about cosmos. So, are we fighting still the old battle which should have been won millennia years ago? It is still with us. So far, our attempt to understand the working of the mind. I have introduced the study of the world. The mind was always fascinated with. What is the world we live in? Where did this world come from? Where is it going? What to do between where from and where to? These became the central questions to which generations were giving answers. Where from, where to? What to do in between? About doing in between, there was a field which was generally called ethics. How to live. And here our mind produced many teachings about how to live. This kind of very wide democracy, how to live. When Socrates died, many of the followers of Socrates came together and asked a question. Who was Socrates? And they disagreed. Who was Socrates? Everybody saw Socrates differently. The question was he a good man? Yes, sure, he was a good man. And the problem was how to define goodness, honor. And there were various schools which came out of Socrates, which emphasized what is the basis of good life. One of them, Stoics, said, it has to be a balance of the mind, to see the world in this balanced way, without exaggerations. Another group, Epicurean, said no, to live it up, to enjoy life. But what do you mean enjoy? Physically, spiritually? So they disagreed again. So there were various schools which were produced, emphasizing what is joy, joyous life. This teaching came to Rome. Rome, of course, embraced, the physical. And it affected Rome in its philosophy of live it up, carpe diem. Squeeze out of every day as much as you can. Go to all games to, live it up. You know what happened to Romans? They loved this philosophy of good life. They were building Super Bowls everywhere, all over the Mediterranean Sea. And wherever the army went, they had to build a Super Bowl. And they participated in World Series. Carpe diem, live it up. They could not stop it. It is like a fish, in a lake doesn't know that it is surrounded by water. Fish does not know that there is water. Human beings are like fish. When they get into the stream, they go with the current. So this is one lesson how to live which affected life in Rome, but also life in Greece. Life in Greece was affected to such a degree that they could not defend themselves. They became victims of Roman attack. Rome occupied in 2nd century BC Greece, and we have a statement of a great Roman senator, Cato. When they came to Athens, and when he saw celebrating Romans, he commented in Latin, Grecia capta ferum victorem cepit, victorious Rome defeated was defeated by great defeated one. Rome was defeated by the culture of those we have defeated. Cato had a great insight, but Roman soldiers were celebrating their great victory. Greece indeed defeated Rome culturally by giving them all of those teachings like Epicureanism, also this carpe diem. During 2nd century, 1st century, 2nd century AD, under Nero in 1st century AD, the collapse of Rome was already very close. Nobody was able to stop it. There was another Greek school, sophists, Stoics, who were trying to stop it by balanced living. But they were too weak, to stop the decline of Rome. Another group which came out of this ethical consideration was called cynicism. It came out of Diogenes. Diogenes is the proverbial rich man who came to Rome from Sinope, wrote a book called Wallet. He was a banker. And after he finished the book, he took few lessons from Socrates. And Socrates twisted his mind. He decided he will give away all riches and decided that humanity can survive if they need as little as possible. And he decided that what he needs is to have a tub in which he will sleep, to have a cup to drink water from. And when he saw a little boy who was using his handful to drink water from, he threw it away. So he was a man of modesty who wanted to solve social problems by asking for as little as possible. He is also a man who decided how to die. He suggested that he will just stop breathing. They asked him, please show us. He could not perform. Just try to stop breathing. How long can you give it? No, it was a joke. He was a joker too. He was a good joker. When Alexander the Great arrived in Athens, he arrived occupying Athens, and he asked, "Where is Diogenes? How come he's not waiting for me?" And he was told, "No, he is at the sea, sunning himself." So off he went 20 miles to the south from Athens, found Diogenes, came to him, and Diogenes felt that there is a shadow thrown on him. And the voice is asking Diogenes, "Diogenes, what could I do for you?" Diogenes says, "Get off my son." And Alexander the Great supposedly said, "Were I not Alexander, I would rather be Diogenes." We don't know whether it happened, but he describes Diogenes very well. So his teaching was teaching of the first communist who wanted to have everything in common, wives and children in common, no private property. And so he went probably a little bit too far. And so it was a very rich school which followed Socrates.
I need a reminder. Diogenes was blind with a lamp looking for an honest man? Was
Yes,
that-
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Put the two together.
Yes, and he all of these schools had great influence on development of Rome and later of the whole posterity. Not very much is added to the way how to live. We have Christian ethics where all values are dictated by relationship to God and to God's revelation and to those who administer God's revelation and the Bible. Here is the central core of how to live. There is a lot of altruistic ethics to live for others. This is what we can find in Christian ethics. But the whole system is administered from above, in a very firm dictatorial way. Not until modern time there are additions to our definition how to live. During the 19th century, we have a school in Great Britain called utilitarianism. Utilitarians are people who measure everything in terms of utility. What is moral must always benefit the greatest number of people. Inventor of this interpretation, which is a modern Greek interpretation in 19th century, was Bentham. Bentham designed a cloth that women should have everything buttoned, the coat buttoned in the back, so that they need somebody to unbutton them, And you always need somebody, So this was a general design of clothes, that all of us are together. So utilitarianism is a great teaching of 19th century with the principle greatest benefit to greatest amount of people living together respecting each other. Among modern ethical teaching, I have to mention teaching of Immanuel Kant. German philosopher Kant gave us not only fusion of epistemology, reason and senses, how we acquire knowledge. It is a first great fusion, epistemological fusion. In ethics, which he regarded as very important for any philosophy, he gave us principle of humanity and categorical imperative. Principle of humanity sees as the ultimate goal human being, for which all of our decisions have to be made. We have to see the human being, how to live with other human beings in society. His categorical imperative is a formulation: act in such a way so that the maxim of your action can become the maxim of rest of the humanity. In each of your action you do, act in such a way that it is becoming the model for all other people to act. So if you are willing to steal, by stealing you establish a principle that you are, or the whole society consists of thieves. Of course I wouldn't like to do it. So act in such a way that norm of your actions becomes the norm of rest of humanity. So it is a rationalistic principle of Immanuel Kant. In 19th century there were new ideologies emerging. One of them was ideology of socialism, which was a reaction to capitalist social order. The classical country is Great Britain, where workers were protesting their long hours of labor and being handled, as cattle. Thanks to political system of Great Britain, which is a parliamentary system, it was possible, as we know historically, to change bit after bit the system, to reduce number of hours working from 14 to 12, to 11, to 10, not to let women work, children work. You see, the political system of Great Britain is responsible for reduction of ills of capitalist system. Came year 48, revolution on the continent, where fight of workers was organized by radical revolutionary movement, which at the end was defeated in 1848, and leaders of this movement escaped to England, which was generous enough to offer them political asylum. One of them was Karl Marx and his radical group, And it was Karl Marx who, after he moved to Great Britain, to England, he never became in thinking British. He was state European revolutionary. He attracted revolutionaries from all over the world. Yes, but he was the most important leader who produced a new Bible of socialism called Das Kapital, which is an analysis of the capital, which is produced by working classes, and how this capital is distributed. So it is a radical teaching, analysis of capitalist society, which has to be removed by revolution, where workers will arise and take over the leadership of the society. Karl Marx wrote 3 volumes of Das Kapital, the capital. For those who are familiar with it, you discover that the first volume was written shortly after 1848 revolution, when he came to England. The third volume shortly before he died. And you can derive from it a great influence of British society on Karl Marx. In first and second volume, he expects that economy and worsening of economy will produce conditions for working class to take over. There is no possibility of changing otherwise. After 30 years in England, he could not deny the influence of British parliamentary system. It was against his wishes that the working class is living better without revolution. So he admitted in his third volume that there can be influence on happenings, social happenings, from above, from the government, from arts, from teaching. That there are other elements, not only economical elements, which drive the society into revolutionary catastrophe. Now they ask him, but how much can the other influence? He said, no, not really very much. No, how much? 10%? No, I would not say. It's still the economical forces are the decisive forces. No, you admitted that there can be influence by religion, by philosophy, which can change the working conditions.
Didn't Charles Dickens have a lot to do with those changes?
Yeah. And this is what split the whole movement of Marxism into social democracy, which is based on the third volume of Das Kapital. Social democracy became a political party of workers all over the continent, became parliamentary party. Marxian teaching was taken over by Lenin, who did not have a parliament in Russia. So he subscribed to first and second volume of Das Kapital. Revolution, revolution, and only revolution. So you see the split within this socialist movement into social democracy all over Western world. Is parliamentary party called social democracy in Sweden, from Sweden down to Spain, Portugal, Australia, everywhere. They believe that social change can be achieved by collaboration in the parliament. But what about the countries which do not have the parliament? This became Bolshevism. This became Soviet Union, and leader which try to establish new world using revolution. And that movement, as you know, was defeated in 91 when Soviet Union ceased to exist. It looked like everything was over. In our days, we are discovering that those long years of dictatorial communism, Bolshevism, has never been eliminated from the minds and actions of people. Yes, this was the Mensheviks were Bolshinstvo is in Russian majority, Menshinstvo minority. When during the fightings before First World War, when Lenin was fighting for leadership, he received majority on one minor issue. He was psychologically so astute that in spite of having minority in everything else in the Socialist Party, he took the name Bolshinstvo, Bolsheviki, for his party, which never had majority only on one minor issue, and called it, we are the leaders of majority. So this is the Bolshevik. And they kept it until they were defeated, and now it looks like they have a new leader, former KGB man, who is in charge of rebuilding the empire. We will see how far he will come with it. So we have started with the values, how to live in our society, what kind of order, social order we should have. And we got into ideological battle of modern history. And we are still very deeply in this battle. Hand in hand with these problems of ethics and how to live, in our thinking of the mind came a new discipline called axiology. Axios is value. So, next to our striving for knowledge, for facts about the world, about knowledge as such, we deal in our life with values. This is a world we have to accept. Value of music, value of literature, value of art. It cannot be denied that it is a value. And we will ask questions. Where are values coming from? Ethical values, artistic values. Are they made by man? Or are they discovered? Do we make beauty, calling something beautiful? or do we discover beauty? Is our values made or found? It splits everybody, either or, that you cannot. Again, I would prefer fusing them together, you know. The values are values of the mind. And if we intentionally select certain values, we select certain music we love and abhor music we don't love, then we cannot stand it. These are value judgments. We use value judgments in our everyday life. So we have another field, axiology, where all ethical and aesthetical values are values which we are trying to understand. When you are a musician, you ask this question: what is the value of classical music? Why is classical music superior to any kind of folk music or today's music which doesn't survive very long, has to be superseded by something else? Because the values of most of our modern music are short-lived. How come, you know, that Bach's music inspires us still 300 years after he composed it? Beethoven, Mozart. Also in all other arts. Why do we appreciate Shakespeare having superior insights into human nature, or Dostoevsky? Why do we admire Dostoevsky and penetration into the dialogue of Ivan and Great Inquisitor? Inventing something. Jesus appearing in front of Great Inquisitor in Spain. And Jesus never says a word. He appears in front of the Inquisitor, who keeps talking. You were given, Jesus, tremendous opportunity to rule the people by making miracles. You refuse it. Mistake number one. Mistake number two. You were given superior powers how to rule humanity. You did not listen to the advisor. He was a good advisor. You rejected it. Sorry, Jesus. Great Inquisitor sentenced him to death again. Jesus never mentions a word. You see the superior judgment. This whole configuration of Great Inquisitor, who in name of God runs the world. This whole invention of the story, when told by oldest Karamazov brother to Alyosha, shocks Alyosha. A human being, you are not human being, you could not have story like this. I even could have said, I followed Husserl phenomenology. I invented it. This whole encounter is my invention. But it makes a point. We are still in this unended story of search to discover mysteries of the mind. And the latest is this study of axiology of values. I could close with statement: the sole greatness of any philosophical system is its axiology, is ethics and aesthetics. Everything else, the facts are changing. It is in the field of values where we grasp permanent values. They can lead us in our life better than any set of changing facts. Amen.